Congratulations, Charles. You're the first episode of 2023.
Oh, wonderful.
Congratulations. We're coming back from break. So
I'm the New Year baby.
You are the New Year baby, yes. So
bringing it.
Whenever we do the year in review, you will be mentioned first.
Oh, boy.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Conspirinormal. We are back from a long 3-week hiatus, but we are nevertheless here again to usher in the new year of 2023. And we're starting out with a guest that I heard on another podcast, Where the Road Go, not too long ago, a few months ago, in fact, Charles Lear, who contacted me about coming on, but I was going to contact him. So here we are. And I'm really proud to say that, Charles, did you listen to this show? I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Good. Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about you, first of all, because we're going to talk about some of a blog that you did about when UFOlogy went off the rails, and we're going to talk a little bit about your book called The UFO Investigators. But let's talk a little bit about you and just kind of how you got into this subject and how you started writing about UFOs. What led you to write the book about UFO investigators specifically?
Yeah, I tell everybody I was born interested in this, but I'm interested in pretty much everything. And, paleontology, geology, history, and, so, but I started, I think the first book I remember reading was The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Lear. I probably read something way before that. And in the 80s and 90s, mostly the 90s, there was an awesome video store in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that had every UFO documentary you could think of on videotape. And so I rented every damn one of them. And I love to take naps to UFO videos because they have great synth music. And I say it's like baseball. You can drift off and then come back. And, something interesting is on and maybe didn't miss too much.
Yeah, right.
And you can watch them repeatedly that way. I became well versed in, a lot of stuff. And I happened upon Martin Willis's podcast UFO, and I really liked his approach because he has had just a very, not a believer, not a non-believer. He just listened to people, and I consider Martin Willis the Charlie Rose of ufology. He seems to get stuff out of people, and he's got kind of a lovably, slightly awkward persona. He's notorious for having technical issues, but he's a really likable guy. And his guests really open up to the point where he can just stop talking and they'll just go on. But he used to offer the second hour. The first hour was free. The second hour, you give him a contribution via PayPal. I didn't want to get a PayPal account, but I saw he had a guest blog spot. And I said, "Hey, Martin, I don't want to get a PayPal account, but I'd love the second hour. Could I write you a regular blog?" And he said, "Sure." And I started doing it, and I've been turning in one once a week for about the last 4 years. And I look at the old ones; they're pretty awful. I learned how to write along the way. I started studying grammar and all that good stuff. And got better and better. And actually, a trick to all you aspiring writers, if you actually learn the rules, it's a lot easier. You write a lot faster. And so I don't use Grammarly or anything like that. I like to just know the rules. And they're not rules, it's just how to make it as clear as possible. So I got better and better, I believe. And I'm happy with it in any case. And at one point, Martin said, Charles, you've got a hell of a lot of blogs. You ought to compile them and put them into a book. And I said, well, actually, I started writing a book, just toying around with it. I got interested in writing about the flying saucer investigators, mainly from 1947 up to the termination of Project Blue Book. It's my favorite period in ufology. And mainly inspired by the Mothman prophecies, because the characters in there, Jim Moseley, Gray Barker, Ivan T. Sanderson, they seemed really interesting to me. And I wanted to find out more about them, and I started looking into them and writing blogs about them for Martin. And, said, this is really what I want to write about. So I said, well, long story short, he introduced me to Philip Mano, who runs Flying Disc Press. And I pitched the idea to Philip. Philip went for it. And so I ended up writing The Flying Saucer Investigators, which was published in June of 2022, the 75th anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's sighting. So I was doing the podcast circuit after that. And here I am.
That's a great way to write a book. A lot of my favorite books kind of start out that way, as small collections of writings, and then eventually turn into a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's chronological, so it was pretty easy. And I was able to pull some of the blogs I actually wrote and rejigger them and use them in the book, and also write original material for the book.
Yeah, I definitely like the chronological approach. You delved into some historical things that I haven't really seen a lot of people really talk about. There's some things that just some details in the book that I just didn't. I don't think I knew before about some of this material.
Yeah, a famous one is the coining of the phrase "flying saucer." It's always told wrong.
Right, right.
Everybody says Bill Biquette took Kenneth Arnold's quote saying they skipped like a saucer on water, and the term actually first showed up in the Chicago Sun-Times, supersonic flying saucers. So as far as I can tell, is the first time flying saucers ever became a thing was in the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yeah, I think you do a great job with starting with Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver. People don't think about it, but it really starts the modern UFO age. There's a lot of the memes and tropes that are part of ufology that go into it.
It's also the idea that Palmer came up with the idea of it could be true. And I call it the what if story. So it before that it was science fiction and fact or journalism, and Palmer, a big science fiction fan, combined the two, and a lot of science fiction fandom turned on him and really hated him for it. But yeah, he's pretty much the first guy to really make that kind of thing popular.
It could be true.
Yeah.
Before we get into the book, which are some questions that I have, we wanted to talk about this 5-part series that you did on Podcast UFO on the blog about the UFO Cover Up Live. And just basically, this is the moment you say that ufology went off the rails, but there's so much in the book that I could be like, well, that's really when ufology went off the Maury Island might be where ufology goes off the rails, but and that's much earlier than UFO Cover Up Live. But UFO Cover Up Live, yeah, definitely some things go off the rails. But I can't help but think, and you know, we've had Adam Go Rightly on talking about saucers, spooks, and kooks. Yeah,
Yep.
that's the title. And we've had him on talking about that, and I can't help but think that a lot of the mythology that goes into something like UFO Cover Up Live is what you later see happening and being, you know, exploited by like the X-Files. And that's kind of become that modern mythology of like the underground bases and the aliens among us and all these type of things really start really with like the Benowitz affair and all this, which lead Richard Doty, which leads all the way to the UFO Cover Up Live, and then it just goes on from there. So why is the UFO Cover Up Live? Why is that when the ufology goes off the rails?
It was a showcase for what was very much what was going on at the time, and there was so much BS being pumped down our throats. It was also a different. Basically, I looked into this because I'm writing a follow-up to the Flying Saucer Investigators called the UFO Investigators, starting from the termination of Blue Book up until Bill Moore's 1989 MUFON Symposium speech, where he basically came clean about his relationship with Doty. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the most difficult stuff to write about. So I figured I might as well take a stab at it. And, that's my first pass at it. Because it's really complex. It's really convoluted.
Writing probably helps you like sort it out in your own mind.
Yeah. That's very much what that whole series was about. It wasn't, it was an exploration of mine. And another thing I do in the blogs is I link to all my sources, so the reader can go ahead and look for themselves, take the journey with me if they want. But a big difference between the period I wrote about in the published book and this next period is that the UFO investigators kind of took the spotlight. Before it was the UFOs, kind of more so than the investigators. The investigators sat a little more a lot more in the background. And in the leading up to the 80s, the investigators got more and more public, and they became personalities. Mm-hmm. And it became more about them. And it also, it wasn't them presenting the evidence. It was them saying, I'm a respected investigator, take me at my word, which that's a big difference between, this period and the earlier period where they said, here's the case. Here's all the facts we know about the case, and they present it. And mostly in publications, written publications, newsletters for their members. So, by the time we have UFO Cover Up Live, you've got these personalities, William Moore, primarily in that one, but all Stanton Friedman, don't forget him. Jacques Vallée's become big. And then, not to mention people like Robert Dean. There were all these guys who would come forward with credentials, like Robert Dean, for instance, saying, I was, I think Colonel, I believe he was, saying, these are my military credentials. Take everything I say at face value, and I'm not going to give you any evidence for it. So anyway, by the time we get to UFO Cover Up Live, um, it's kind of just turning over to people like Robert Dean and John Lear and Bill Cooper and that whole mess.
Mm-hmm.
And we should say that there's no relation between you and John Lear, right? That's just it's purely coincidence.
Maybe very distant, but not close enough that I benefited any from Bill Lear's fortune, his father.
Right. The inventor of the Lear jet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, I first came upon, I first ran into UFO Cover Up Live. I'd seen it before, but I was looking into a story about a UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base, and ran into one of my favorite 70s documentaries was UFOs It Has Begun, which was first released in 1974 as UFOs Past, Present, and Future. It was primarily written by Robert Emenegger, and he produced it along with a guy named Alan Sandler. It has Rod Serling as the main narrator. Burgess Meredith shows up, Jose Ferrer, Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek. It's got Hector Quintanilla, who was a Project Blue Book head, who is kind of infamous for, I think it was Dale Spar, the UFO chase across Ohio into Pennsylvania, and really made him look bad. But yeah, it's a real nice slice of history. And at the end of it, it's got Quintanilla, Hynek, Vallée, I think Vallee's in there, all kind of discussing at the end the possibility of extraterrestrial life. But it's also looks like Robert Friend is in there too, a Tuskegee Airman, who was also head of Project Blue Book, who was a favorite of Hynek's. Hynek really liked him. He said he kind of looked at it with an open-minded point of view. So you've got all these awesome historical characters in there. And it also seems like there's a lot of cooperation from the Air Force. William Coleman, who was a former spokesman for the Air Force at the Pentagon, who handled the UFO issues, takes the camera crew on a tour through the Pentagon and talks about UFO cases. The Thomas Mantell incident, and gives a little history. Robert Friend tells a crazy story about how I think the CIA and intelligence officers got involved with a contact T case where a woman was claiming the channel, some guy named Afa, and then one of the officers claimed that he began channeling him, and then a UFO appeared in front of I think it was a CIA photographic lab. They were there interviewing this guy, and he said, "Do you want a UFO appear? Look out the window." And Friend actually says this on camera. So it's a really weird documentary. But an interesting thing about the documentary is that Emenegger has later said that he was promised footage of an actual UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base, and it was withdrawn at the last minute. He's claimed that it was because in the wake of the Vietnam War, the military was trying to open up to the public, and like it was a PR exercise of some sort. And then because of Watergate, he says he thinks that's why they pulled the footage at the last minute. So the end of the movie is illustrated footage of what's supposed to be on this film. So the reason this becomes significant in this discussion is because these guys Emenager and the guy who promised them the film, Paul Shartle, both appear on UFO Cover Up Live, and they tell the story. So you've kind of got this conspiracy thing set up right there at a UFO Cover Up Live. Like there's, the government knows the old story that the government knows more about UFOs than they're telling, and they've actually got footage, actual UFO landing, and Coleman is there with Emenager, and he actually tells the story of seeing a 70-foot UFO, I think in 1955 when he was piloting a DC-25. And that's actually, a moment where you kind of perk up during UFO Cover Up Live. One of the few moments that is maybe. And what's interesting about UFO Cover Up Live, it's basically a train wreck. The producer, Michael Seligman, decided he wanted everything scripted nearly the last minute, and made up all these cue cards. And it made for some really awkward moments because some people are really bad at reading cue cards on the show. And it's pretty obvious, like Mike Farrell is the host from MASH. Mm-hmm. And he's very poised, very relaxed. He rolls with the punches.
Got a crazy comb over going on too.
Yeah, definitely. So Farrell's doing his best to make it seem natural, and it's definitely not seeming natural. And there's just some awful moments where and Bill Moore had contacts in Russia, a Russian investigator. So he arranged for Russian investigators to appear on the show, and they say they've got a live feed. It seems that Farrell actually asks questions early, and so they might have filmed them. It's either there was a really bad delay, but then there are moments, it seems like there's a bad delay at first, where he asks the question, and then the Russian researcher on the other end is waiting, and then comes in. And then there are moments when he seems to ask the question too fast, and almost steps on them as they're talking. So as to whether that was filmed beforehand or not, that's a question.
And the answers that the Russians were giving too, was it? I think you read that those were also reading them from cue cards.
Yeah. And so you've got these thick Russian accents. One guy's pretty bad at English, and it's really awkward. It's cringe-inducing, literally. So it kind of starts off promising, and then just spirals into a mess. And a big thing about it is it's a show. It's Moore and Friedman they definitely saw this as a showcase for their MJ-12 documents, which had hit the scene. I think it was 85, and this is in 88. And they were really, they saw this as a showcase for, their groundbreaking research into the Roswell case. But they're not featured probably as much as they'd like to have been. A big part of it centered around the Gulf Breeze sightings, and
that was big at that time. Yeah, 88. Yeah.
And what was the guy who took the pictures?
Ed Walters.
Yeah. So they look at Ed Walters' pictures, and they have one guy that pretty convincingly says they're fake, and good old Bruce Maccabee says, no, they're real.
The lamps in the windows.
Come on now. It's not lamps in a window.
It's real, damn it.
What a debunker.
Yeah. But what really made it ridiculous was these two government insiders, which are pretty conclusively been argued, were Richard Doty and Robert Collins as Falcon and Condor. Doty as Falcon and Collins as Condor.
Of the Aviary.
Yes, in shadow with their voices altered. And the most infamous thing is Doty Falcon saying that we had an alien on Earth, and it liked ancient Tibetan music and strawberry ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Which wasn't that pulled from some of the John Lear stuff, the strawberry ice cream.
I don't know about that. I could believe it though.
Yeah, I think eventually, I think that came from some stuff that I think that. Well, this is what Aaron Gullius has talked about before. Is that I think there was a thing where they were trying to mess with John Lear, and was trying to mess with Bill Cooper. Mm-hmm. And so the strawberry ice cream was part of that. It was like some document that they made. So I think Doty was just picking that from.
That's interesting. Yeah. I forget what that. I remember. I know that document where actually Bill Lear told Cooper straight up, "You just said that document was real. I made that up."
That's the document. Yeah.
And there's another moment where you've got Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum talking about their experience. They're actually very poised. I think they'd been on the circuit a little bit at that point, but they handled the script very well. And then they have Doty Falcon chime in that this was an alien aircraft being piloted by human pilots, military pilots who lost control of it. So anyway, another ridiculous part of UFO Cover Up Live was that they had all these call-in numbers.
For first, second, third.
CE1, CE2, CE3, CE4. You haven't seen anything.
Why would you call it? Wait.
And it's $1. It's $1 a call.
I haven't seen anything. Click.
Yeah, and it's $1 a call. And he actually, Farrell is forced to read out the entire number for each one of those. So you've got all this time where you're just like 1-800-433-1681. So he's going through all this.
I remember that. Yeah.
It's just like, and this just awful synth music permeating the whole thing.
It's the 80s. It's about UFOs. Awful synth music is just going to be part of it. It's
crappy. Really crappy.
Was that like some DX7?
Not even. I think it's.
I'm a DX7 fan myself, but it can get.
It actually it's really bad. It's just probably some awful MIDI crap. But anyway, it's pretty much a train wreck of a show. And the squeaky chairs, and Farrell goes up a few times, and it has to rearrange his cue cards, and it's a mess. But the whole Doty and Collins thing made it ridiculous. But what's come about, though, is that this was part of a government disinformation program, rather than, this was just, another really ridiculous thing is when Stanton Friedman says they have proof that they've recovered alien bodies that were autopsied, and they have all this lurid illustrations of the Roswell crash. And as far as I go with the Roswell crash, if you read I think it's the July 9th Roswell Daily Record and read Mac Brazel's original description of the material. He describes rubber and sticks and tape with purple flowers on it. And and talks about it being in a bundle you could, carry in your hands, probably about 8 inches in diameter. And as opposed to, wreckage strewn over a football field. But, I don't want to get too into that. I'll make enemies. But in any case, the fact that there's a really good website. I don't know it, but looking offhand, but I think it's the. I should have this on hand, but I don't. Basically looking at all the witnesses who have been discredited one by one, and just everything that's been kind of thrown out since Friedman said, we have proof. And, obviously they didn't have proof, or, we would be talking about, aliens as an absolute proven reality right now.
I take it you're not a big fan of the Roswell crash story.
Well, I mean, it was shoved down our throats all through the 80s and 90s. I mean,
yes,
that
was.
It's kind of like, the whole TTSA thing. It sucked the life out of ufology. And so much other stuff was going on. This was, this happened in 1947. And meantime, what was happening at the present,
Well, especially I think with the Roswell material, so much of it was way after the fact. It was, 30 years later when Stanton Friedman really starts to really dig into it. And that's fine, but all we really know at that point was that Jesse Marcel saw this weird material in the field. That was it. There were no alien bodies. There was nothing like that. And then 10 more years down the line, all of a sudden, all these people are coming out and saying, "Oh, we saw the alien bodies, we saw the ship, we saw all this." And so you go from this kind of like simple story to all of a sudden there's alien bodies.
Yeah, it just kept getting added on to
right, and it was, and the only proof for that, the only proof of the alien bodies that I saw, consistent proof, was the Glenn Dennis, the mortician. I think he was a mortician. The mortician that drew from memory the drawing that a nurse gave to him in 1947, 40 years before. He drew from memory of another drawing, secondhand. I mean, that was it. That was essentially the big reveal.
But that,
and when you read that, when you really get down to the core of it, it all kind of starts to just kind of fall apart.
That distance, though, allows something like that to build and self-generate.
Yeah.
If it was something sooner, you'd have enough actual people around who are involved.
But it worked to the Air Force's benefit, because all they could say was, okay, well, they also tried to explain it off as a weather balloon. I think there was a lot more going on, but it was something that it was a top secret craft that we had.
The unfortunate thing about that too is, like, the mogul balloon explanation made sense, but then he went further. In the Roswell case closed, I think there was a part 2 of that, and that's where he tried to explain away the bodies as crash test dummies that didn't even exist at the time.
Right. Yeah, so, it was like something from the 50s as opposed to something from the 40s.
Yeah, they stepped on their own foot on that one.
And their whole idea was like, well, people just jumbled all this up in their minds and all that. But
even Marcel was, shown to have exaggerated his service. Talking about his service, he exaggerated. So his credibility was in question as well. But anyway, that's it's an endless debate.
Yeah, I think the Roswell crash stuff has just done more harm than good. It did really well for Roswell, New Mexico. I can tell you
Yeah.
that.
I was actually when I came back from, I was staying in Magdalena, New Mexico during the whole 2020 mess. And on my way back, I drove back and I stopped at Roswell, and then I stopped off in West Virginia and went to the Flatwoods Monster Museum, the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library, and the Mothman Museum. And
I was just there in September in both of those places. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. But anyway, so what I wanted to do was investigate the whole idea that the UFO Cover Up Live was a disinformation thing. So in order to do that, you've got to look at the self-proclaimed disinformation agent, Richard Doty. I also wanted to explore the idea that William Moore was culpable in all this, or at least looking the other way. So the way I approached it was to first look at the credibility of Moore and Doty. And so I looked at the Philadelphia experiment. I read the Philadelphia experiment, which Moore co-authored with Charles Benowitz. I believe Moore's name is first in the byline. And the guy that Moore got behind was Carlos Allende / Allen.
Carl Allen, yep. Yep.
Aaron Goyas did a really good series on Carl Allen Allende. And he basically, the story of the Philadelphia experiment came out because Carl Allen, let's just call him Carl Allen, it's easier. Carl Allen wrote Morris K. Jessup a series of letters. And one of them, he described this experiment where the military was working on camouflage, and the story is that they transported a ship from the Philadelphia Navy Yard to the Norfolk, Virginia area, and then back. And then the story has come out that has developed that, there were all these crewmen embedded in the ship as part of the ship. And it was a big mess. And that's the mythos. And it all started with Carl Allen. Carl Allen came forward in 1969, I believe, walked into the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization offices and said, it was all a hoax. I made it up.
He's like, it's bullshit. Yeah. Right.
So in the book, Moore and Berlitz call it a so-called confession. But Carl Allen just had a history of making stuff up. His whole family said, he faked a heart attack so well the paramedics had to check him 3 times when he was a kid. He was constantly making up stories. And what's really funny is Jim Moseley found him, came across him, and notified Gray Barker, hey, I've got Carl Allen here. And Barker convinced him to come to West Virginia, Clarksburg, West Virginia. He put him up in the Clarksburg Sheraton, and said, they taped him, Moseley and Barker drinking heavily. And
yeah, you can hear some of that on Aaron's Saucer Life episodes about it. He plays some of that audio. Yeah.
Yeah, so that tape is at the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library. And when I was there, David Houchin, the curator, gave me a paper he wrote about it. So, this is the guy that Moore got behind. So that kind of looks at Moore's credibility, and also, the fact that he's able to call it a so-called confession and look the other way in favor of telling a good yarn. So then you get to Doty. So Doty is a self-proclaimed Air Force Office of Special Investigations, CIA trained disinformation agent. Um, well, his service records are available online. They're not easy to find, which I've said really kind of doesn't reflect well in the UFO community. Um, but uh, uh, yeah, I'm trying to take a moment to find my source here, but while I'm doing that, I'll talk. But basically, what they show is that he had a career in law enforcement. Yeah, UFOs documenting the evidence. It's on blogspot.com.
Yeah, he was like a state trooper at one time, something like that.
Yeah. Finally, Richard C. Doty's United States Air Force records. Yeah, so that's UFOs documenting the evidence on blogspot.com. Yeah, so they clearly show him working his way up from a gate guard at Wiesbaden Air Force Base. Worked himself up to becoming a detective at Kirtland Air Force Base with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And I saw one quote from one of his superiors saying he was his drug guy. So it looked like Doty was looking into drug issues. But at the last entry in his service records is him in food services. So, Kevin C. Randall would say, he was kind of busted down to KP duty. But it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like the career trajectory of a CIA trained disinformation agent. And the other thing too is that if he was a CIA trained disinformation agent, I would think he would have to take a secrecy oath. And he's publicly proclaiming that he was a disinformation agent, which I don't know many others in the intelligence community who would go about doing things that way.
Was he not in AFOSI? Was he not Air Force Intelligence? That's what I've always understood.
It's not Air Force Intelligence. It's Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Yeah.
He's an Air Force cop.
Yeah, he was kind of a paper pusher.
Yeah.
Really.
And Philip Klass. Klass is an infamous debunker. I've actually turned to Klass in a few instances because Klass, for instance, with the
that's almost like that's almost heresy in the UFO field, Charles.
Yeah, it kind of is. The thing about Klass is that he did some genuine investigative work and turned up some genuine stuff, and wrote about it very concisely. And he did so with Moore, this whole Moore and MJ-12 stuff. Unfortunately, the class would also say some really stupid stuff and go out of his way. Like there's an infamous thing of him offering one of the Walton witnesses $10,000 to come out and say that it was all a hoax.
Yeah.
And he would also say a lot of stupid stuff that really killed his credibility. But I found that some of his research is actually valuable. So, he kind of stepped on his own foot in terms of being credible. But he basically Doty was over in Germany, and I think he was still with AFOSI, and he got basically relieved of duty for making stuff up about what he did. But then afterwards, you can also get his records with the New Mexico State Police. And in those records, he had 2 car crashes that he got reprimanded for and suspended without pay. So he definitely wasn't getting any preferential treatment. So it really doesn't look like Doty was what he said he was, what he said he was. Um, a caveat is that when I wrote this, I said, look at this as a thought experiment. I'm looking at this from the point of view of parsimony. The simplest explanation is usually the best. It's also Occam's razor. And so, the simplest explanation seems to be that Doty was making stuff up. But what keeps it going is that the egos of UFO investigators saying, well, we must be onto something if the Air Force thinks enough of, what we're finding to send out a disinformation agent. And disinformation agents have been a constant in ufology. Accusing somebody of being a disinformation agent. John Keel was accused of being a disinformation agent, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so I thought, let's look into the credibility of these two guys. And it looks pretty shaky. Then we get into the MJ-12 documents, which came in a manila envelope. It was film of 8 documents, what's called the Eisenhower briefing document, and then the Cutler Twining memo. No, that they found that later. I think it was a letter from Truman starting the MJ-12 group. In any case, it was all film. You don't have any of the original documents, but it came to Jamie Chandray, and it had a Kirtland Air Force. It had an Albuquerque postmark, which kind of points to Doty. And prior to this, Doty had given Moore what Moore is called a retyped teletype, which. And then what was called the Aquarius document. And the Aquarius document was supposedly a briefing to Carter. And the Aquarius document is the first place you have the words MJ-12. So this was probably the first time the UFO community ever saw MJ-12 was in the Aquarius document, which was prior to all the MJ-12 documents. And in that document, you have a section that says basically the aliens have seeded a human being here on Earth to teach us civilization 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, I wonder who they're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and what's interesting too is there's punctuation errors in that, and grammar errors. So this is also shows up in the MJ-12 documents, kind of consistent errors in grammar and punctuation. And then the MJ-12 documents themselves are pretty damn ridiculous. And in doing this, I actually read them for the first time just because, I grew up with all this stuff.
Somebody has to do this.
Yeah. And yeah, they're pretty damn ridiculous. It starts off with a recap of Kenneth Arnold's sighting. This is a presidential briefing document. So, you're going to UFO history 101. And then it describes the basically a crash of a craft in, I think it was 75 miles north west of Roswell Army Airfield. And researcher Brad Sparks pointed out, well, if you're flying, it's only about 60 miles. And if you're driving, it's like 110 miles. So you'd think they'd have that right in the document. So people started punching, basically the way that, okay, the getting to the Aquarius document. Yeah, actually, we got to back up a little bit. Because we haven't even talked about Paul Benowitz and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about this. Mm-hmm. But essentially, when Moore came forward in his 1989 MUFON Symposium speech, he talked about having this relationship with Doty, where Doty would give him information in exchange for him keeping an eye on investigators and helping him disseminate disinformation. And his main activity was really with Paul Benowitz. Paul Benowitz was a researcher who got involved with a case of a woman, Myrna.
Myrna Hansen, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. She claimed to have been taken up into a UFO with her son, and a cow was also taken, and they saw a cow mutilated on board the craft. And Benowitz was associated with APRO at the time as well. And so, he was working with Myrna Hansen, and you can see right at the get-go the guy is going off the rails because I think he wrapped a car in aluminum foil and interviewed her in the car because he was afraid aliens would be listening in. A different version of the tinfoil hat. And
really shouldn't laugh about that because the guy he really went insane. All this kind of stuff drove him insane.
Yeah, and everybody, a lot of people blame Doty, and it's like he was on his way before Doty got him.
They just pushed him right over the edge, but yeah.
Yeah, and so, and he was writing all these crazy. He wrote up this whole thing, Project Beta, and laid out the aliens' plans to take over the world and how we can defend ourselves against them. And I've invented a gun that seems to work. And it's he wrote the president and congressmen and a lot of people and sent out this Project Beta. But along the way, he pointed a lot of. He thought he saw UFOs over around the Manzano weapons storage facility. He's in Albuquerque, and he's right next to Kirtland Air Force Base. And he had a deck, and he set up all this. He was an electronics wizard. And a computer programmer. He was really, really a smart guy. So he set up all this electronic surveillance equipment directed at Kirtland Air Force Base, and he's picking up all this stuff that he thinks is alien transmissions. Well, Kirtland Air Force Base has just about every alphabet soup agency you can imagine housed there. So he went there and made a presentation. Hey, I'm picking up all this stuff. I think I've seen UFOs, and I think I'm picking up alien transmissions. Well, of course, they're interested because he's got all this surveillance equipment picking up what are more than likely classified transmissions.
Yeah.
So this is when Doty gets into the fray. So Richard Doty assigned, I imagine, to investigate, and Doty seems to have taken it upon himself to, or maybe was under some loose set of orders to get Benowitz's attention away from Kirtland Air Force Base. So Doty got him on to Dulce, New Mexico. Benowitz had been up there before, looking into cattle mutilation cases. I think there was a town meeting, and that he met Gabe Valdez there, and so he was familiar with Dulce. So Doty basically convinced him there was an underground base at Dulce and flew him over there and convinced him this was so. And he also got more involved, and more would, was basically helping, according to Moore, helping to feed this whole Dulce myth. And then of course, Benowitz ended up going into a mental hospital.
Yeah, how I've always kind of understood it was, he was picking up those transmissions, but he might have been seeing also. I think they make this in Mirage Men. They talk about how Benowitz might have actually been seeing early drone technology, so they wanted to deflect him away from all that stuff, and they used Doty to, say, okay, yeah, you're right, the aliens are real. But and they're in a underground base that's really close to you. So go over there, and it was just a big deflection.
Yeah, and there was another thing too, where Bishop writes about it in his Greg Bishop wrote about it in Project Beta, saying that Benowitz programmed his own computers to decode alien messages. But then he offers another thing, the sole source of which was Moore claimed that he met J. Allen Hynek at, I think, a MUFON symposium, and said that Hynek confessed that he delivered a computer from the Air Force to Benowitz that was pre-programmed that would take all these messages and make them into alien messages.
Oh my God.
Which doesn't sound like Hynek at all. And so I think the idea that Benowitz made the computers himself and programmed them himself, and they showed him alien messages because he programmed them that way is a more likely story. So that's more in Doty with Benowitz. But then you get into the MJ12 stuff, which is where we get into UFO Cover Up Live. And, the whole MJ12 stuff, that just pretty much those papers have a lot of people, most people dismiss them as being forgeries, fakes, more than likely by Doty.
Yeah, there's also too. I mean, we had Nick Redford on a few years ago, and there is a theory that some of that material might have been from the Soviets as a different disinformation campaign, with some of the bad punctuation and misspellings that could lend credence to that. But then again,
that's interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of that's one of the biggest thing is they're so amateurish, and they're like this thing that they wanted to be real. It's too good. It's just too damn good.
Yeah, well, you're getting back to class. Actually, the people who, if you really want respectable people who looked into
get out of ufology.
Brad Sparks and Barry Greenwood wrote about it in a paper. They presented at I think it was the 2007 MUFON Symposium. Give me a second. Part 3, yeah. Boom. So Sparks and Greenwood were looking into, where all this stuff could have come from. And what they looked into was the idea that Doty was working with Robert Pratt on a book. And basically what happened was Moore was meeting with Doty and telling Doty, this is all talked about in Barry Greenwood and Brad Sparks' paper. Doty was meeting with Moore, and Moore was telling Doty about the research he and Stanton Friedman were doing and giving him all the information. So Doty would come back and say, this information, and reinforce this. And then the MJ12 documents have all the names. The first things that Friedman says, these are all the names that we thought. the only thing that really surprised them was the name of Donald Menzel, who was the Philip Glass of his day. So Greenwood and Sparks talk about a feedback loop going with between Moore and Doty and Friedman. So they're saying that was the genesis of the MJ-12 documents. So this feedback loop also seems to play into this whole thing of the aviary. So we have the
the aviary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's another twist in this twisted tale. But anyway, the idea that the MJ-12 documents were real, Class talked about as being real beneficial to Moore, but Class says Moore had a problem because if they turn out to be false, everything points back to Moore because he's the guy, qui bono. So, who benefits? So he talks about Moore meeting up with Timothy Good and Moore offering Timothy Good the documents, saying, you can publish these in your book. Just let us release them first. And that way it looks like, and Timothy Good basically presenting it like he got it from an independent source. So it looks like, they both got him from independent, got him from an insider source. He also has the benefit of having instant international coverage. Unfortunately, Timothy Good's publisher, this is, I think the book was above top secret. Timothy Good's publisher decided he was going to have a press conference before Moore and Chandray were going to announce the documents at a conference that Moore was hosting. And Moore had to scramble to get his out first. So the day before Timothy Good's publisher had a press conference revealing the documents that were going to be in Timothy Good's book, Moore got out, had a press conference and got the documents out into the public eye. Anyway, that's the MJ-12 story. But then, another twist in the road is this whole aviary thing. So the aviary thing is another really interesting aspect to this whole time period. While I was writing this, it occurred to me that this was when the whole First Earth Battalion thing was hitting the military.
Yeah.
So this is Jim Channon. Basically, Jim Channon, while serving in Vietnam, noticed that saw that soldiers were shooting over the heads of the enemy, and wanted to find out why, and wanted to build a better soldier. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the military had a big morale problem, and so they were open. And they paid Shannon to go on a fact-finding mission to build a better soldier. And, he had this idea that, maybe that sort of compassion shooting over the heads of the enemy could be turned into a strength. So he went on his fact-finding mission, consisted of him going on this whole new age exploration out on the West Coast. And I think he went to over 100 different organizations and just went through everything, out of body experience, astral projection, you name it.
This is the men that stare at goats.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. This is that whole thing. And I actually in preparation for this, actually read the whole First Earth Battalion manual, which you can download. And it's 51 pages, and it's interesting. It actually, it's got a lot of, new age woo-woo, but it's also, what's really interesting is you can, I was taken back to a lot of Donald Rumsfeld's ideas during the Gulf War. With the stripped down army, the whole idea where they dropped MREs down for beforehand, and little signs where you're friends, and tried to. It's really weird that there a lot of this stuff seems to have been implemented.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like the movie, makes the point. Fictionalized, of course, but the movie makes the point that a lot of this material was and these tactics were probably used in psychological warfare operations.
Yeah, well, not to mention non-lethal weaponry came out of all this too. John Alexander's a key example of that, proponent of that. But yeah, so it was during this period, the Men Who Stare at Ghosts, the John Ronson documentary, which appears as part of Secret Rulers of the World. Mm-hmm. You've got Major General Albert Stubblebine. I think he had 120,000 troops under his command. Goes on camera talking about trying to walk through his office wall. The I'm made of atoms. Atoms are mostly empty space. The wall's made of atoms. It's mostly empty space. You just got to merge the spaces. Boom. No, never did it. So.
And this is also going on at the same time SRI is happening.
Yeah.
Stanford Research Institute and all their psychic and remote viewing, remote viewing programs and all these type of things. This is all going on at the same time.
Right. And a lot of the same guys show up in the aviary lists.
Yeah.
You've got John Alexander. You've got Kit Green. Kit Green was the head of what they called the CIA's Weird Desk. Robert Pandolfi, who was his successor. Hal Puthoff's in there,
right?
And you've also got this guy Ernie Kellerstraus as Hawk. But yes,
which, by the way, you would be interested to know that if you've ever heard Dr. Future on our show, Dr. Future he was a civilian contractor, worked for the Air Force at Wright-Patterson. Ernie Kellerstraus was his boss.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it seems that the aviary, it's significant in terms of UFO Cover Up Live because of the names Falcon and Condor. Condor was Robert Collins, and he shows up in the aviary list. And it seems these were the guys that Moore and Chandray were meeting with and getting information from. And they introduced Michael Seligman, the producer of UFO Cover Up Live. They actually brought him to a meeting with some of these guys, and these guys talked about, the aliens we have, and all this stuff that. So Seligman came out of this completely paranoid and was driving everybody on the set crazy. And some of the staff actually made fun of him, and that they wrote up little cards, MJ1 through MJ12, and stuck them on different people's desks. But anyway, so the aviary plays a part in UFO Cover Up Live because Seligman, Moore actually brought him to meet some of these guys at an island in the Great Lakes at one point. So, they talk about all this cloak and dagger stuff.
Right. Yeah. This is all just fun and games kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, but getting back to the whole feedback loop thing, what these guys seem to really have been was a UFO working group that Howard Blum wrote about. I think he actually wrote about it in the New York Times. That there was a group of military insiders who were interested in UFOs and sat down and talked about them. I think Jacques Vallée was involved as well. And, they're all, guys like Hal Puthoff and John Alexander and Robert Collins and, Kit Green, who are military intelligence and government insiders. They are trying to, well, what do you know? Well, what do you know? Well, what do you know? Trying to get the skinny on what the government knows about UFOs. Well, Bruce Maccabee actually interviewed Ernie Kellerstrauss and wrote this whole thing called Hawk Tales. And what came out of that was Kellerstrauss basically talking about them getting some of their information from remote viewers who would contact the UFO people. So, and Adam Gorightly writes about it in his book, Saucers, Kooks, and Spooks, and basically sums it up, saying that these Aviary guys were getting their inside information from remote viewers. And so Doty's
it's a good source.
So they're spinning all this stuff around amongst themselves. They're all government insiders, and then Moore's getting the information from government insiders, so it must be true. So all this wackiness is just spiraling out of control. And then the ultimate outcome of all this is UFO Cover Up Live.
And it serves as kind of a mainstreaming to the rest of America of all this mythology that had been brewing in the ufology world.
Yeah, but it's just the strangest thing is that you've got quote unquote government insiders backing this kind of stuff up, and the producer of UFO Cover Up Live, Michael Seligman, actually going in there and believing all this stuff. So
setting up 900 numbers.
Yeah. But, so in terms of it being a real government disinformation program, it just seems that a government confusion program,
right?
But you do see it as kind of a turning point. I mean, ufology is always personality driven, but after this, you think that focus on personality driven research and information and authority and legitimacy through people's backgrounds and affiliation with government or intelligence. After that seems to become more dominant.
Yeah. The idea that the government knows more about UFOs than we do is that's all NICAP. That's all Donald Kehoe. That was the 80s and 90s. Was you have Peter Gersten with Cause, Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, and going crazy with his FOIA requests, and we've got to pry this out of them. You've got people protesting in front of the Congress and the White House, saying, tell us the story. And
the push for disclosure begins. The disclosure movement, really gets started around year 2000.
Yeah. So that's basically all of ufology in the 80s and 90s. And it's interesting that now, the conversation around the podcasts nowadays really seems to be they're as clueless as we are. And, it's a mystery. Enjoy the mystery. but you've still got that. That's still there in UFO circles.
Yeah, it's the new reiteration of it in the whole to the stars and everything around that.
Yeah. You fast forward today, Lou Elizondo, and A-Tip, and
Focus on people with government credentials.
Right.
Yeah, and
It's the same story. Yeah.
And having that as a main focus, I find it unfortunate as I approach it as an historian, and I like looking at the cases and listening to the witnesses and trying to get to the original witness testimony, and listening to their stories, and their stories are really compelling, and really weird, and writing about this period is going to be difficult for me. I love the 70s, but the 80s and 90s, everything just gets awful and paranoid, and the whole us and them between the government and us. I just hate that.
It's a reflection of the time period too. I mean, yeah.
We're
it's a lot worse now.
we're post. I don't know. We're with Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge. I mean, those were some awful things, where just the government came down hard. The government, people got hurt. I would say things were actually worse then. This was under Clinton. I forget who the attorney general. What's it? The attorney general.
Reno.
Janet Reno. And the whole, if you had a "Don't Tread on Me" sticker, you were kind of targeted as a terrorist almost. And things got nasty. So I kind of really don't like this period in ufology. I like what's going on now. I like the conversations I'm hearing and all the podcasts, with you guys and Soraya and Micah Hanks and Greg Bishop, Aaron Golias. Aaron's. I like Aaron because I think we're simpatico in terms of our historical approach. He's like really into the contactees. He's actually opened my mind up to the contactees.
Yeah, Aaron's great.
Yeah. But the idea that UFO Cover Up Live was a disinformation program, I personally came up with I don't think so. And in terms of Doty actually being a real disinformation agent, I don't buy it. But the fact that the Air Force hasn't publicly acknowledged it, he was or was not working for us, is interesting. The only between Robert Hastings also wrote extensively about this and came down hard on Moore. He came down so hard on Moore that he accuses Moore of delivering his speech at the 1989 MUFON Symposium, coming clean as kind of a preemptive thing, because Hastings had pretty much called him out. But between Sparks, Greenwood, and Hastings were three guys that really looked into this stuff deeply. And, in terms of, was there really an active Air Force disinformation program going on with CIA backing, but mainly the Air Force. And Hastings was the only guy between the three of them who definitely thought yes. He thought maybe Doty kind of went off the rails a bit, but the Air Force came up behind and said, "Hey, that this will work for us." I think Greenwood plays around with the idea that the Air Force had a grudge against ufology and kind of went with this. He doesn't really say that there was an active program, but they kind of just let it go. But I don't know. For me, it doesn't seem that there was an active program, but I can picture the Air Force just saying, uh, you UFO nuts have caused us so much problems. But then again, this is, they got out of the biz in 1969 officially. And it just seems like a long time for them to hold a grudge. So, but anyway, I come down on the side that, UFO Cover Up Live was a train wreck more than it was a disinformation program.
You might have spread disinformation, but it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't truly on purpose.
Yeah, and I've seen quotes where you really don't need much to spread a disinformation in the UFO community.
That is true.
They do it pretty well themselves.
That is true, especially now. I think social media has amplified that effect.
Yeah, I actually totally ignore that, so I'm not up on that.
Good. I would like to point out that what you point out, that the production company that did this was the same one that did the Al Capone Secrets of Al Capone's Vaults.
Yeah,
which I've never looked for, but I know if I could find it on YouTube or somewhere. But like I remember that I was a kid then, but I remember it being just like everybody's like, "What's in Al Capone's vaults?"
I think didn't they do the whole Waldo Rivera thing where what was he? He was going to open up something, and it.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, so Geraldo was his big thing. We're gonna open it up, and like it was nothing but trash. It was like just bottles. That was all that was in there, but that was like watched by millions of people because it was live. It was like a live event, and it was just a big dud.
What happened is that the guys who were responsible for the success of that, and I think it was the other one was about the Titanic. They weren't available. Yeah. So
were they going to raise the Titanic or something?
Something like that. So Michael Seligman, the producer of UFO Cover Up Live, was a low-level producer, and also apparently had no real knowledge of the UFO subject. So he wasn't the best guy to turn to. And another thing that happened too was that there was a writer's strike going on at the time. Tracy Torme was involved. Tracy Torme was actually he was part of James Fox's latest production. Tracy Torme is still going, and Tracy Torme was actually involved in this. They wanted him to write, and he said, "No, I'm part of the Writers Guild."
Yeah, he was a writer on Star Trek: Next Generation. He wrote Fire in the Sky, the original screenplay for that.
Yep.
The actual son of Mel Torme.
Yeah, so he's the guy who produced the whole Gulf Breeze segment.
Yeah. Well, you point out too that Barry Taff had something to do with writing this too.
Barry Taff was the he was the guy who actually posted on the UFO Bulletin Board service, talking about the behind the scenes stuff of all this, and talking about how Seligman was going off the rails, and and I think Barry Taff, he was actually a paranormal investigator. I think it was the Entity.
Yeah, the Entity case. Yeah. He was very much involved in that. Yeah, I had him on. It was several years ago.
Oh, okay.
But he talked about that. But like, I had, if I'd known that then, I wish I could have asked him then.
Yeah. So apparently there is a posting on the UFO Bulletin Board service, which I'm amazed you can find. I found it. And somebody has preserved the UFO Bulletin Board service, which is really cool. So I found the posting by Barry Taff. I'm putting quotes there because Barry Taff claimed not to have written it, but it really seems like he did, because it's inside information on the behind the scenes stuff of UFO Cover Up Live, just basically talking about what a mess it was. With Seligman getting more, and Torme talks about it too, about Seligman getting, really paranoid after, meeting with the UFO working group / the Aviary, and just making really silly decisions. And, one of those being scripting the whole show, which was supposed to be live. So, yeah, it just seems like I ended the whole thing with a quote from Jim Moseley. What better way to end anything? Wow. Jim Moseley was interviewing Edward J. Ruppelt, and there was a chapter in Jim Moseley's 2002 book, Shockingly Close to the Truth, Confessions of a Grave Robbing Ufologist. And it was regarding the Air Force's UFO policy, and it was titled Planned Confusion or Pure Stupidity. I wrote, as we have been trying to stick to the principle of parsimony throughout the series, if one applies that question to UFO Cover Up Live, the simplest answer is to be preferred. So, planned confusion or pure stupidity. I think pure stupidity would be the parsimonious answer to that question.
I would like to also tell you that there was a couple, 2 or 3 years after UFO Cover Up Live, there were a couple of these Is Elvis Alive specials that are also classic. But when I watched UFO Cover Up Live, I realized that UFO Cover Up Live was just a template for those Elvis is Alive specials, because it was exactly the same thing, reenactments, talking to experts, call in if you've seen Elvis. It was exactly the same. It was exactly the same.
Do they have any confidential informants in the shadows?
Right. I have seen Bubba Hotep. That's a classic movie.
Oh yeah. Bruce Campbell at his best.
We did not get to talk about the book, but we will talk about it, because I'm going to have you back on, Charles, to talk about it. The Flying Saucer Investigators is
That'll be a lot easier.
1.
This is a very difficult subject to talk about. It's so convoluted. Mm-hmm. I recommend anybody who's interested in this, read my blogs, available at podcastufo.com, behind the scenes of UFO Cover Up Live. But Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, Watch Mirage Men, and Adam Gorightly's Saucer, Spooks, and Kooks. I really like Gorightly's book. Those are all really good sources for looking into this kind of stuff.
All right. Do you have time to stick with us for a Patreon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. We'll talk some of these other questions, but please tell everyone where they can find the Flying Saucer Investigators.
Amazon.com.
There you go.
Yep. Put out by Flying Disc Press, Philip Mannel's organization, publishing company.
And they can also check out your blog entries at, what is that URL?
I actually, I do an audio blog too, for people who don't like to read. So every blog I turn into an audio blog. So podcastufo.com for the written blog, which has all the links, so you can find all the source material. Martin Willis's YouTube station has Martin Willis runs Podcast UFO. So Martin Willis's YouTube channel has the audio blogs every week as well. So.
All right, perfect, guys. And of course, Conspirinormal, you can find us at conspirinormal.com, and you can find our Patreon, which we're going to do one with Charles here. And Serfiel can tell you where to find that if you would like to throw us some support.
If you'd like to join the rest of our conversation here and try to untangle another web of secret influences as confusing as these 1980s UFO mythos, then you can head on over to patreon.com/conspiranormal and join the International Association of Conspiranormalists for only $5 a month and get some of these extra episodes.
All right, guys. All right. Well, Charles is going to stick with us to do a Patreon, and we will see you guys next week with some more guests on Conspiranormal. It's going to be quite a year. We're really excited.